Hello. So in this video, the final one, I'm so glad I don't have to make any more videos after this because they take forever to make, is sleep and dreaming. So this is for paper two. And the key concepts that you need to know for sleep and dreaming are the following. So we need to know the reasons why we sleep. So we've got four different functions of sleep. You need to know the terms that are in bold and then the explanations of them. So keeping us safe. This is we sleep in the dark to avoid predators, and we're very still when we sleep so that we don't kind of like alert them to our presence. We obviously can't see very well in the dark, so it makes sense that we sleep in the dark. Um, we also sleep for a healthy brain. So when we're in REM sleep, it resets our brain, it consolidates our memories, really good for decision making. So the consolidation of the memory is the bit that you need. And then we've got physical repair. So we, in kind of like the slow wave sleep, it helps to balance our hormones, helps to stimulate growth hormones, and also heals our cells. So this is why when you're ill, you sleep a lot. So it helps to do that. And then also it lowers our cortisol stress hormone. So it makes us feel really emotionally stable. We don't feel really emotional. So again, if you're feeling really stressed when you're revising, just go for a little nap. 20 minutes will do you and you'll feel a lot better. Or have a good cry. Crying reduces cortisol as well. Another key concept is the sleep cycle. So you might be asked questions about what happens in the different sleep stages. So REM sleep is the one where we dream. This is where we've got rapid eye movement. Our brains during this stage are very similar to when we're awake. In stage one, this is when we're getting quite drowsy. We start to kind of like get a little bit sleepier. Our brain waves are still quite active at this point. We might also have those kind of like jerks that jerk us awake at that point. So they're called hypnic jerks. Stage two, we've got our eye movement stops, our brain waves are getting a little bit like slower. We've got kind of sleep spindles, which are kind of like where it goes like this, and we've got K complexes, which is like this. On the we can what you do is you put like an EEG brain scanner, which is like electrodes on your scalp, and it measures your brain waves, which is where we get this kind of understanding of the sleep cycle from. And then stage three and four, they are different stages, but they kind of put them together because they've got similar, very slow wave sleep, very kind of high like waves. And this is deep sleep, very difficult to wake up from this stage. You don't have any muscle activity, so you kind of will experience sleep paralysis if you wake up too quickly from this stage. If you wake up from this stage as well, you'll be quite groggy because you've not cycled through the stages, and you obviously get those growth hormones in those stages as well. And we cycle through towards the night. So we go from stage one to two to three to four, um, back to two, and then we go into REM sleep, and then we go back to two, three, four, sorry, two, three, four, go back up to two, go back into REM. And so throughout the night, you get in different periods of REM, which is why it's really important that we get at least 8 hours sleep because then that gives us the right amount of REM. So if you have shorter, you've not, had enough REM sleep, so you can't consolidate your memories, which is why your revision might not be working because you've not had enough sleep. We also need to know the neuropsychology key concepts. So we need to know the difference between an endogenous pacemaker and an exogenous zygote. So the exogenous zygote is really easy to remember because this is some external factor that tells us when we should be awake, when we should be asleep. So if light is available, it goes into our eyes, hits the retina at the back of the eye, travels to the SCN, so the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is in the hypothalamus, and this signals a gland, so the pineal gland, to secrete melatonin to stop it if it's light, and if it's dark, to secrete that hormone, and it makes us sleepy. So we our brain is using the light and the dark to set this process off of whether we need to sleep or be awake. No, the endogenous pacemaker is just our internal clock that tells us like we have a cycle. So if you remember the guy that went in the cave, he had an internal clock of about 25 hours. Now there has been modern research which shows this is a bit different, but for the purposes of the exam, we need to know it's about 25 hours. So we don't actually have a 24-hour cycle, which is why we need the exogenous zygote to entrain us into a 24-hour cycle. Because if we didn't have the light and the dark, then we wouldn't live by the clock that we've got, so by the way that the earth is. So we have to kind of keep in line with that 24 hours. So the light helps us to do that, which is why we sometimes have problems with sleep. Another example of an external psychopath is meal times. You can't just put meals, you've got to put meal times. So knowing like breakfast time, dinner time, you have certain meals at those times, for example. So it gives you an idea of what time it is if you didn't know that if you don't have a clock. And then we've also got some even more key concepts. We've got quite a lot in this topic. So we've got insomnia. You need to know the difference between sleep onset insomnia and sleep maintenance insomnia. You need the full term, so don't just be putting onset or just putting sleep insomnia. You've got to put sleep onset insomnia. So this is where someone struggles to get to sleep. And then sleep maintenance is where you are fine getting to sleep, but you wake up in the middle of the night and then can't get back to sleep. So you can have both, but some people just have one or the other. And there could be various different reasons as to why you've got insomnia. So, for example, if you are using your phone right before bed or a computer game or whatever, like 2 hours before you sleep, that light is still in your brain and you haven't released melatonin yet, so you're not sleepy yet. So it'll take a couple of hours after you have done that. Same with the meal. You don't want to be like digesting that before you go to sleep. So they tell you not to eat right before bed. And then sleep maintenance, you might have sleep apnea, for example. You might have a restless leg caused by low magnesium. You might be showing with a snorer. You might be going through hormonal changes like during puberty and menopause and perimenopause. That affects your kind of ability to sleep as well. And then we've got a first theory. So we've got Freud's theory of dreaming. The idea is that we dream because we're fulfilling the wishes that we can't fulfill whilst we're awake. And we do this unconsciously, so we're not aware of it. And we might we might have repressed things that have happened to us in the day. So repression is a defense mechanism and it's in our unconscious mind. And so we're kind of releasing that in a dream. So that could also be happening. So the idea is that our ego, so the part of our personality that's in control of everything, is weakened during dreaming. And so our id and our superego are more active. And things can come out in dreams that the ego wouldn't let happen. And we've got different types of content in dreams. So we've got the actual thing that we're dreaming about is the manifest content. And then we've got the latent content, which Freud said is the underlying explanation of that dream. So, for example, you might dream about white wolves in a walnut tree, which is what the study is about. And Freud would say, oh, that means that it's the Oedipus complex. You've got castration anxiety, fearful that they're going to chop you. Oh, so sorry, I think there was like a bit of an error there. I don't know how much of that you heard or missed, but maybe it was better because I was talking about the Oedipus complex that I'll talk about in a minute. So criticisms of Freud's theory, it's quite difficult to falsify. Like it's quite difficult to test what's in someone's unconscious mind because you don't have access to it. So this might be absolute rubbish. It might not be valid at all. And it's quite subjective to interpret a dream. Like Freud's interpreting it in his own kind of, it's maybe showing some research bias here. So it might not be very valid. It could be that the things that you're dreaming about are just things that have happened in the day. So it's got nothing to do with like what Freud said it was to do with. So the Wolfman is evidence of Freud's theory, but obviously Freud conducted the study, so there could be that research bias there. And it's on Wolfman, who is called Sergei Pankachev. You don't need to know that, but that was his name. And he was in his 20s. He was from a wealthy Russian family. And some of the background of him is that his sister committed suicide in 1906. His father committed suicide in 1907. He was experiencing depression, and he had so his father was experiencing depression. I think his sister was as well, actually. But he has got a phobia of wolves, um, and being fearful that they're going to bite him. And we can say, we've got culture bias, we've got age bias. Um, Although I suppose he does follow him over a bit of time, so maybe not the age bias point, but we've got a lot of culture bias because obviously in Russia, and we've got like kind of class issues and things like that. We've got a longitudinal case because we've just got one person, Wolfman over a long period of time. So they're looking at interviews between 1910 and 1914. So looking at him when he's younger. And it's also been analysed 15 years later. So we've got retrospective data, not very good because maybe the way that Freud interprets him later on is not very valid. Can't really ask him about it like afterwards. Freud only actually met Wolfman twice. So once when he was younger and once when he was older. There's like a picture of him like on his lap. Although is that little Hans? Don't actually know who that's a picture of. We could check that later. So the procedure is Wolfman's had a dream. He's lying in his bed. It's winter. It's nighttime. It's winter because obviously there's no leaves in the tree. The window's open at the bottom of his bed. He's terrified because he can see 6 or 7 white wolves with big tails, ears are pricked up, and they're in a walnut tree. And he thinks that they're going to come and bite him. And that is the procedure because that is the dream. And then the results are what Freud interprets. So the wolf dream is the manifest content, and the latent content is what Freud suggests has happened and why it's happened. So Wolfman saw his mum and dad having sex. So they saw the primal scene, and he saw them with underpants on. So that is why they're white, because their underpants were white. So they said the undergarments were white. The bed sheets were also white. So this is why the wolves are white. So it's symbolic of that. Remember, Freud says that things in our dreams are symbols of something else. And the reason for that is because it's too traumatic to think of what it really is. So we need something that's kind of like a metaphor. And the white wolves are watching him because he was watching their parents having sex. The wolf symbolises the father because they've got a big tail and he's got a bigger penis than what Wolfman has. And also the suggestion that they're in the tree, it was around Christmas time that this happened. And when you get a Christmas present, you're very happy. And that's apparently what the mum's face looked like when she was having sex with the dad. And what they suggest is that he's got an unconscious desire to be seduced by his father in a similar way. Um, and the mum's looks to be castrated because she doesn't have testicles and a penis, and so he's quite frightened that he's going to get castrated by his father, and that is what the wolves eating him is about. It's representative, symbolic of castration anxiety. And what's happened is he's repressed all his fear into his unconscious mind, and it's been displaced or put onto the wolves. So now he's actually phobic of wolves in real life because really he's scared of his father and has castration anxiety from his father. Now, you might say that this is quite good because it's got lots of qualitative data. We can find out reasons why. The qualitative data came from letters that the dad had written to Freud. So he's got lots of things to analyse. But maybe there's researcher bias because Freud's trying to support his own theory. And also, it's very difficult to test the unconscious mind. How do you get access to it? This might be rubbish. And also, the sample, very small, got culture bias, not very representative of everybody. This might only explain why Wolfman dreams, and actually, he's also mentally unwell. He's got phobia. So maybe people that don't have that dream for different reasons. And so it's not a very good explanation of dreaming for that reason. Now, the second theory, a little bit more of a nature neuropsychological theory, is activation synthesis theory. And it's got two parts of it. The suggestion is that during REM sleep, the brain has activation from random brain spikes, and that the brain tries to synthesize and make sense of this, and that's why we dream. So the random brain spikes come from the pons at the bottom, and they move towards the middle of the brain in the limbic system where our emotions are, which is why our dreams are a bit bizarre, a bit weird. And then it goes through the outside of the brain, which is the cerebral cortex, and this is where our stored memories are. And so our brain doesn't like when it doesn't understand what's going on, so it tries to make sense of that. And so because we've got many different brain regions activated on that limbic system, they're quite bizarre. Now, a criticism of this theory is that that's quite reductionist because it's just suggesting that the reason that we dream is because of random brainwaves, but actually there could be some reasons why we're dreaming that has some meaning to us, like Freud suggested. Also, this theory doesn't explain recurring dreams because if it was a random brain firing, then you wouldn't have the same dream twice because it wouldn't be, the statistical probability of that would be quite rare. Also, people that have got damage to their brain stem where the pons is, they still dream. So that can't be the reason. So the brain spikes must be coming from other areas, not just the pons. It doesn't just start in the pons, for example. So maybe not completely valid. And then the theory that supports the activation synthesis theory is Williams, not to be confused with What else do people confuse that one with? I was going to say like Daniel and Moral and Wilson, that's it. So the Wilson, the Clive Wearing one, some people get those two mixed up. So Williams is about dreams being bizarre, which would support activation synthesis because it activates all those different regions. It makes it bizarre, particularly the limbic system. We've got 12 students, biopsychology course. So, very unrepresentative. They're at Harvard, quite a intelligent university to go to. We've got more females than males. We've got age bias as well. But the reason why they've done that is because if you're younger and if you're older, you sleep different. So younger people sleep more, older people sleep less. So, and it's because of hormonal and development things. So that's probably why they pick that age range. So I'd maybe avoid age bias because, technically it's not that much of an issue, but you'll still get marks for it if you talk about it. And we've got a quasi experiment because they're looking at people's dreams and people's fantasies. So the reason they're doing that is because when you dream and you're in REM sleep and you're having a fantasy, you're not in REM sleep. So the idea is that dreams should be more bizarre than fantasies. And they've got a self-report, so they're measuring the bizarreness of the dreams and fantasies. So what they do is they've got a diary. They're being asked to write in this journal about their dreams and their fantasies. So every time they have a dream, write it down. Every time they have a fantasy, which is like a daydream, write it down. So the researchers selected 60 of these. So they had to pick ones that were longer than 5 lines so that they could actually analyze them and that they were like visual so that they could um like understand them a little bit better. And they've divided line by line using a coding scheme of whether or not there was a plot, thoughts, emotions of the character, or anything else, and then how bizarre they were. So whether or not it wasn't bizarre, whether it was uncertain whether it was bizarre or not. Incongruent means that it doesn't make sense, like putting a sheep in a suitcase. That doesn't make sense, it's illogical. And discontinuity means like you're at a swimming bath 1 minute and you're in school the next minute. So it's not like continuing as a normal story would. So these are examples of bizarreness. And there's some examples here. So unexpected change from the sheep in a suitcase to a swimming pool. We've got 3 independent judges. So we've got maybe inter-rater reliability being quite strong, which it was, 80%, quite good. That means that there's no observer bias when they are judging or put research, because it's an experiment, isn't it? Research bias when they are analysing the dreams. So the bizarreness level is accurate. And what they found is that dreams are more bizarre than fantasies. So we had 0.23 compared to 0.09, which was a frequency density. You can plot this on a histogram. So you might get a question about a histogram in this one. Or actually, no, it wouldn't be a histogram. I think it was a bar chart. And then also they've got the more significant difference was in plot discontinuity, which is the bizarreness aspect of it. And we've got 89% accuracy of distinguishing between a dream and a fantasy. So what this means is that it's supporting the activation synthesis theory because in REM sleep we've got the random brain waves, which makes it more bizarre. In a fantasy, you're not in REM, so you don't have those brainwaves. So therefore, it's a different process in our brain between dreaming and not dreaming. And some strengths we have got, it's quite valid. We've got lots of qualitative data in those journals, and it's not retrospective, so that's better. But then they might show social desirability bias. If you have a really embarrassing dream, you might not want to write it down, and so people might not have actually been valid in what they were writing down. And also, we've got a lack of control over dreams or fantasies, like distinguishing between the two. Like people that were dreaming at home, they might have been dreaming in non-REM. They might have been dreaming in the other stages. We haven't got control over that. And when you're having a fantasy, a daydream, you might be in REM for some people. I mean, maybe not because your eyes are open, but you're not darting around. But maybe the brain spikes are, different. What am I trying to say, it might not be because of those random brain spikes, it might be because of, something else. So it's very difficult to establish causality of why they are different. So we're assuming it's because of those random brain spikes, but it might not be. And then our applications for the real world of treating insomnia. So you might get a question about neurological damage to the hypothalamus. So there was the Ellister question that we had a go at. So for example, a car accident with the L1. You could have had a stroke, there could be some surgery that's nicked it, you could have some damage to your SEN. So you might have to explain that there's damage to the SEN, and that might mean that the hypothalamus doesn't get the signal. Sorry, the SEN is in the hypothalamus. They don't then have the signal of light and dark, or maybe they have that signal but they don't then pass it on to the pineal gland, so the melatonin doesn't get released. So you might give somebody melatonin tablets to help in the short term, but in the long term you want to use some techniques. So we've got two techniques that you need to know these terms. So the first one is relaxation techniques. So these can either be meditation, they can be clearing the mind, imagining your worries floating away on a balloon, they can be deep breathing, which is more of the meditation one. They can be relieving tension in the body. And the idea of why these work is that it activates your parasympathetic nervous system, which is part of the autonomic nervous system. So the rest and digest, kind of the opposite of fight flight. So it calms you down and you're more likely to go to sleep. Also, we can do sleep hygiene. Now, in sleep hygiene, I think on the mark scheme it says you can say about the actual environment itself or about your kind of routine before bed. So things like being dark, having like blackout blinds, having like a eye mask, will prevent light from stimulating your SEN and reducing melatonin, so you'll stay asleep or get to sleep. Avoid blue light from devices for the same reason. Getting exercise, avoiding large meals, not having caffeine and nicotine because they keep us awake, and alcohol as well interrupts our REM. So all of these kind of things can help reduce the impact on not sleeping and prevent you from having insomnia. So hopefully that was helpful. Again, have a go at a few of those questions, particularly like ones about the neuropsychology that you struggle on. And if you've got any questions, I will make you a block it as well so that you can practice those if you want to.